am happy to be in the house of the Lord. Thank you, Apostle, for establishing the protocol so I can get right to what I have to say this evening. Praise be to God. I'm going to talk about Sarah. Sarah, favor or favored? Can you see yourself? Was Sarah favored by God? The main purpose of a woman's life during biblical times, as Apostle spoke about, was to marry and bear children. Children were the hope of the future and the promise of a strong Hebrew nation that could fight off its enemies. Barren women sought God's grace, believing that only the Lord had the power to open or close a woman's womb. Amen. Psalm 127:3 says, children are a gift from the Lord. Yes, they are a reward from Him. Yes. God made many barren women fertile and gave special children to others. Who was Sarah? Sarah, she was the wife of Abraham, but she was also Abraham's half-sister. My God. They had the same father, but different mothers. Come on, somebody knows something about that? The Apostle Peter cited Sarah as an example of the holy women who trusted in God, possessed inward spiritual beauty, and was submissive to her husband. Submissive to her husband. I'm just going to say it again. Submissive to her husband. Sarah was barren, and God blessed her womb far beyond her childbearing years. She was the only woman whose age was recorded at the time of her death. This was a sign of great importance to the Hebrews. Sarah died at the age of 127. My God. Sarah is the only woman in the Bible whose name was changed by God. She was first called Sari, meaning my princess. But God changed her name to Sarah, signifying princess to all. Eve was the mother to all. Sarah was the princess to all. Sarah, she was a woman of faith. She was promised a son by God, and his name was to be called Isaac. God would establish his covenant with him for an everlasting covenant. Sarah had been unable to have children for many years, so she decided to give it to her handmaid Hagar, which you'll hear about later, to her husband in order to obtain the children. When God told Sarah, oh no, you are going to have a child, Sarah laughed at God. How many of us have laughed at God? My God. When he has told you something, you've laughed at God. Because she laughed at God because she was past the age of childbearing. Right. And her husband Abram was too old. She laughed at God when he said that she would have a son while she was listening at the opening of the tent behind her husband. God said, why is Sarah laughing at me? Jesus. Waiting for God to act in our lives may be the hardest task we ever face. Yes, God. We become dissatisfied. Come on, I need some real saints. Have you ever become dissatisfied for waiting? My gosh, when God's solution does not match our expectations. Sarah's life teaches us that when we feel doubtful or afraid, we should remember what God said to Abraham. Is there anything too hard for God? Sarah waited 90 years. Some of us can't wait 90 minutes. Come on now. We want some instant instant gratification when it comes to the Lord. She waited 90 years to have her baby.
My God.
Certainly, she had given up hope of ever seeing her dream of motherhood fulfilled. Sarah was looking at God's promise from her limited human perspective. But the Lord used her life to unfold an extraordinary plan, proving that He is never limited by what usually happens. Sometimes we feel like God has placed our lives in a permanent holding pattern.
My God.
Rather than taking matters into our own hands, we can let Sarah's story remind us that the time of waiting may be God's precise plan for us. So I say Sarah was favored by God. Sarah was a woman of God who feared the Lord. She was obedient to the Lord. She was barren. So the rest of this part of this message today is, do you see yourself in Sarah? Well, I've got a story for you. There's a woman that I know that she was told that she was not going to have children, or if she did get pregnant, she would not carry children to full term. She was 39 years old. She had gotten married later in her life, and she was told that she was not going to have children. She was like Sarah. She knew that motherhood was part of her. She knew that motherhood was part of her destiny. She knew that God told her that He had promised her a son and a daughter. Well, let me just tell you, this woman got pregnant at 39 years old.
My God.
The doctor said, you need to have amniocentesis. You need to do genetic testing. You need to do all of these different things. Come on. Because you will not carry this child to full term. And the woman said, what if I do those things? What will happen? And what is that going to get me? All I am going to do is know that I may have a child, because you, doctor, do not have the final say. I may have a child with Down syndrome. I may have a child with some genetic problems. But I know what God told me. So she chose not to have any of those tests. She was never sick. She was never on bed rest. And in 9 months, she had a beautiful baby girl. She had a beautiful baby girl who was perfectly healthy, who was perfectly wise and intelligent, who is just the apple of her grandmother's eye. She was the first grandchild of her grandparents, and her grandparents were almost 60, 70 years old, 60 years old when that happened. I am that woman. I am that woman. I am that woman. But guess what? Remember, I told you God promised me a son and a daughter. And when I was married to my daughter's father, he had a son. And I said, God, that's the son you're talking about. God said, that is not what I'm talking about.
Go ahead.
So when I got pregnant, again, at 43 years old, come on now, somebody talk to me.
What?
Come on now, I am Sarah, 43 years old. I knew the minute I said, this is the son that He's promised me. And my son, today, I did not do the testing again. And my son was perfectly healthy. Yeah, he got a few allergies, got a little asthma, got a little eczema, but he's perfectly healthy because I decree and declare that he is. He's smart as I don't know what. So at 50 years old, I stand before you today that I have a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old because it's the promise and it's the destiny
couldn't even move.
You take these women.